Picture this. Mark Carney lands in Prince Rupert, British Columbia, probably still jet-lagged from his China trip, and immediately walks into what might be the most delicate political conversation of his early prime ministership. He's not there for photo ops with cute sea otters or to admire the coastal scenery, though let's be real, it's gorgeous up there. No, he's meeting with First Nations leaders who have basically said, if you think you're putting a pipeline through here, you've got another thing coming. And folks, when First Nations leaders say they'll use every tool they have, they're not talking about Home Depot. Welcome back to Canadian Insights, where today we're unpacking Carney's trip to the North Coast and why this meeting might determine whether his government sinks or swims on Indigenous reconciliation and environmental policy. Buckle up, because this one's loaded. Let's start with the basics, because context is everything. Mark Carney's in Prince Rupert meeting with the Coastal First Nations Alliance, which represents 8 First Nations, plus the Haisla and Kw'alaams First Nations. That's a significant chunk of leadership from communities who have lived on and stewarded this land for thousands of years. These aren't casual coffee meetings. This is serious business, and the agenda includes major project development in the region, pipelines being the big elephant in the room, and marine conservation, which is basically code for please don't wreck our oceans with oil tankers. Now, before we go further, let's talk about pipelines in Canada, because this topic is spicier than a jalapeno eating contest. For years, pipelines have been this political third rail that nobody wants to touch but everybody has an opinion about. You've got Alberta screaming we need to get our oil to market, you've got environmental groups screaming climate crisis, and you've got First Nations communities screaming this is our land and you didn't ask us properly. It's a three-way political screaming match and nobody's winning. Here's where it gets really interesting. Ottawa, under previous leadership, made an agreement with Alberta to explore a possible pipeline to BC's north coast. Explore. That's the key word. They're not building it yet, they're just looking into it, testing the waters, seeing if maybe, possibly, this could work. Except the First Nations in the region have made their position crystal clear. Absolutely not. They don't want oil tankers in their waters. Period. End of discussion. And when they say they'll use every tool they have to stop it, they mean legal challenges, protests, public pressure, international advocacy, you name it. These communities have centuries of experience protecting their territories, and they're not about to stop now. So Carney walks into this meeting knowing full well that he's about to get an earful. Imagine showing up to someone's house to discuss renovations when they've already told you they hate your renovation plans and have hired lawyers to stop you. That's basically what's happening here. Awkward doesn't even begin to cover it. But let's give Carney some credit for actually showing up. A lot of politicians would send a junior minister or do a Zoom call and call it a day. Carney's physically there, which suggests he's at least taking this seriously. Whether that translates into actual policy changes or just really good optics remains to be seen, but hey, showing up is step one. Now let's talk about why the First Nations are so adamantly opposed to this pipeline idea. It's not just environmental activism or political posturing. These communities have a deeply rooted connection to the land and water that goes beyond what most Canadians can comprehend. The ocean isn't just scenery or a resource to them. It's identity. It's culture. It's livelihood. It's spirituality. The idea of oil tankers navigating through these waters, with all the risks that entails, spills, accidents, ecosystem disruption, is fundamentally unacceptable. And let's be honest, they have every reason to be skeptical. Canada's track record with Indigenous consultation on major projects is spotty at best and insulting at worst. How many times have we seen the federal government say we're consulting while simultaneously approving projects? How many times have courts had to step in and say actually, that wasn't real consultation? The Supreme Court has repeatedly affirmed that First Nations have rights that must be respected, including the duty to consult and accommodate, and yet governments keep fumbling this. The coastal First Nations aren't being unreasonable. They are asking for their rights to be respected, for their territories to be protected, and for their voices to actually matter in decisions that directly affect them. That's not radical. That's basic respect and it's legally required. Here's where the political calculation gets tricky for Carney. On one hand, he's got Alberta breathing down his neck about market access for oil. The province's economy has been struggling, diversification has been slow, and getting oil to international markets remains a huge issue. Pipeline capacity is limited, and every premier Alberta's had in recent memory has made this their top priority. If Carney completely shuts down the North Coast pipeline idea, Alberta's going to lose it, and federal-provincial relations will get even messier than they already are. On the other hand, if Carney pushes forward with this pipeline despite First Nations opposition, he's basically torching any credibility his government has on reconciliation. He's handing a massive political gift to opposition parties who will rightly call out the hypocrisy of talking about partnership with indigenous peoples while ignoring their explicit objections. Plus, he's inviting years of legal battles that the government will probably lose anyway based on recent court precedents. It's a lose-lose scenario, which is basically Carney's entire job description at this point. Welcome to being Prime Minister, Mark. Hope you're enjoying it so far. Let's also talk about marine conservation, because that's the other big topic on the table. The north coast of BC is ecologically incredible. We're talking pristine waters, diverse marine life, ecosystems that are globally significant. The Great Bear Rainforest is right there. This isn't just important regionally, it's important on a planetary scale. Marine conservation efforts in the area have been ongoing for years, with First Nations playing a leading role in protecting these environments. The tension is obvious. How do you pursue marine conservation while also considering oil tanker traffic? Spoiler alert, you don't. Those two things are fundamentally incompatible. Oil tankers and pristine marine ecosystems don't mix, and everyone at this meeting knows it. So when the agenda includes both pipeline discussion and marine conservation, what they are really discussing is priorities. What matters more to Canada, getting Alberta's oil to Asian markets, or protecting some of the most important coastal ecosystems in the world? And before anyone jumps in with why not both, let me stop you right there. The risk analysis doesn't support that. Even with the best safety measures, the best technology, the most rigorous oversight, tanker traffic increases risk. There's no way around it. One spill, just one, could devastate these waters for generations. The First Nations know this, environmental scientists know this, and frankly, Carney knows this too. So what's the play here? What can Carney realistically accomplish in this meeting? Best case scenario, he listens. Actually listens. Not the performative I hear you nonsense that politicians do before doing whatever they wanted anyway. Real listening means acknowledging that this pipeline idea might just be dead on arrival and pivoting the conversation toward what First Nations actually want to see happen in the region. Because here's the thing that often gets missed in these pipeline debates. First Nations communities aren't anti-development. They're anti-bad development. They're anti-being ignored. Many of these communities are interested in economic opportunities that align with their values and respect their territories. That could mean renewable energy projects, sustainable resource management, ecotourism, marine conservation initiatives that create jobs. There are paths forward that don't involve risking environmental catastrophe. Carney could use this meeting as an opportunity to reset the relationship. He could acknowledge past failures, recognize Indigenous rights properly, and work collaboratively on development that actually benefits these communities instead of just using their land as a thoroughfare. That would be leadership. That would be reconciliation in action rather than just words. But if he shows up with the same old song and dance about balancing interests and economic necessities while dismissing their concerns, this meeting will be a disaster. First Nations communities are done with performative reconciliation. They want action, respect, and actual partnership. Anything less is just more of the same broken promises Canada's been dishing out for decades. The political stakes here extend beyond just this one meeting. How Carney handles this will send a message to Indigenous communities across the country about what kind of government is running. Is this a government that takes Indigenous rights seriously, or is it business as usual with better branding? First Nations are watching closely, and so is everyone else who cares about reconciliation and environmental protection. There's also the international dimension. Canada loves to present itself as progressive on Indigenous rights and environmental issues on the world stage. We talk a big game at international forums. But then domestically, we keep running into these situations where our actions don't match our rhetoric. The world is watching too. If Canada can't figure out how to respect Indigenous rights and protect critical ecosystems in its own backyard, what credibility do we have internationally? Let's bring this back to Prince Rupert. Carney's sitting in that meeting right now, or will be soon, and the pressure is immense. These First Nations leaders aren't asking for the impossible. They're asking for their rights to be respected, for their territories to be protected, and for Ottawa to stop treating them like obstacles to be managed rather than partners to be engaged. That's the bare minimum, and Canada has historically struggled even with that. The pipeline question is going to define a chunk of Carney's early tenure. He can either demonstrate real leadership by recognizing that some projects just shouldn't happen, especially when they face legitimate Indigenous opposition and pose serious environmental risks, or he can try to thread some impossible needle and end up satisfying nobody while creating years of conflict. What's fascinating is that the solution here isn't actually that complicated from a rights perspective. First Nations have title and rights. The Supreme Court has been clear about this. Consultation has to be meaningful. Consent matters. If a project can't proceed with Indigenous support, and if it poses unacceptable risks to territories and ecosystems, then maybe it just doesn't proceed. That's not radical, that's just respecting the law and basic human rights. The economic argument for the pipeline falls apart pretty quickly when you factor in the legal costs of fighting Indigenous opposition, the reputational damage, the environmental risks, and the fact that global oil demand is shifting anyway. Alberta needs to diversify, and clinging to pipeline dreams that face insurmountable opposition isn't a long-term economic strategy. So here we are. Carney's in Prince Rupert, having conversations that will ripple across Canadian politics for months or years. Will he rise to the occasion? Will he actually listen and act accordingly? Or will this be another example of a Canadian government talking about reconciliation while pursuing policies that undermine it? The First Nations leaders in that room have been incredibly clear about their position. They're not playing games. They're not negotiating away their territories. They're defending their waters, their way of life, and their future. Carney would be wise to hear that message loud and clear. If you found this breakdown helpful, smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell because we're covering Canadian politics all day, every day. Drop a comment and let me know what you think Carney should do about this pipeline situation. Are the First Nations right to oppose it? Should Ottawa respect their decision? Let's discuss. And hey, if you made it to the end, you're the real MVP. Thanks for watching Canadian Insights, and I'll catch you in the next video where we'll keep breaking down the political chaos so you don't have to.